Hi, it's Morgan with 1455. It is our mission to advance the art and craft of the written word and to build a dynamic and innovative creative community. We offer a variety of free online and in person programs, which are fully supported by our sponsors and by viewers like you. If you would like to make a donation of any amount, please visit 1455litarts.org and click support. Your contribution will be greatly appreciated. We'll see you on the next one.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for tuning in. This is our first authors event of 2021, so I couldn't be more excited. And frankly, I always enjoy the guests because we pick them, but I can say with sincerity, I've been looking forward to this for months because I pounced on this book when it first came out and absorbed it. And it's been so long since we set this up, I had the chance to read it again. So it's the gift that keeps giving. If this is your first time checking out this series, I'm Shawn Murphy. I'm the founder and executive director of 1455. And in brief, all that we do, we're a nonprofit arts organization. We're trying to celebrate creativity and build community and bring the two together by any and all means necessary. We do a lot of programming, most of it, if not all of it, free. And certainly in the last year, we've gravitated toward doing as much virtual programming as possible so that the show can go on while we wait for the world to return to semi-normalcy. And one of the huge benefits of embracing this virtual kind of reality is the opportunity we've had to partner with our friends at DC's historic The Potter's House, which is a bookstore and cafe and so much more. It's a vital part of DC. And as always, I am joined by my partner in crime, Talia Jaffe. Talia, I would love you to say some words about the Potter's House, remind people they can buy Shawn's book, and tell about our partnership and why we love working together.
Absolutely. Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us tonight. As Shawn said, I'm Talia Jaffe, the Events and Operations Manager here at the Potter's House. We are absolutely delighted to have you all here and to welcome our author, S.A. Cosby, here tonight. And are so grateful, as always, for our partnership with 1455 Literary Arts under Shawn's skillful leadership. For those of you who don't already know the Potter's House well, welcome. We are a bookstore, cafe, and event space serving up radical hospitality in Adams Morgan since 1960. We've always been a hub for conversation, action, and activism and community transformation. As you can imagine, our role as a community connector looks a little bit different these days. Interactions in the shop and in line have become even more precious, but our commitment to hospitality continues. To give you just one example, our Pay It Forward program has absolutely and unsurprisingly exploded since the beginning of the pandemic. Pre-March 2020, we were averaging giving out just under 800 meals a year. And in the last 10 months alone, we've given out about 1,000 free meals each month to our neighbors in need. That's just one manifestation of our commitment to hospitality, and it's one we intend to continue. And so are gatherings like this one. We dream of the day we can be together again in person, but for now we feel incredibly lucky to bring folks together for incredible discussions like the one we're about to dive into. We're especially thrilled to have Shawn with us here this evening because his 2020 New York Times notable book is nothing short of a masterpiece, as Shawn Murphy already alluded to. As NPR put it, Blacktop Wasteland is much more than a crime novel. It's a brilliant expression of the understanding that good people often do harmful things for all of the right reasons, and that understanding is something we try to embody at the Potter's House each and every day. I'm so excited for you all to experience this story with us here tonight. You can purchase your copy of Blacktop Wasteland in store at the Potter's House starting tomorrow morning at 8:30 a.m. But if you can't stop by physically in person, you can also order the book through our partners at bookshop.org while still supporting the Potter's House. I'll drop the link in the comments shortly. Again, thank you all for joining us tonight. And to Shawn and Shawn, thank you in advance for what I know will be an incredibly meaningful dialogue.
Thank you so much, Talia. As always, it's my pleasure and privilege. And thank you to the Potter's House for doing all the great work you do. It's really an honor to be associated in any way. So let's get down to business. Where you've got two Shawns on the program. Either something really great's going to happen or there's going to be a lot of trouble. And I'm frankly hoping a little bit of both. I think it's obligatory to rock a Bernie merchandise. I think it's illegal not to in light of the need. So I'm rocking Bernie. We're ready to get it on. Let me give a proper and formal introduction to our esteemed guest. And I'll start by saying I actually had to truncate because since I first met him this summer, his biography's gotten bigger and bigger as more awards have come. So suffice it to say, this is the short version, but I'm happy to read it because it's very impressive. S.A. Shawn Cosby is an Anthony Award-winning writer from southeastern Virginia. He is the best-selling author of Blacktop Wasteland, which was an Amazon's #1 mystery and thriller of the year, #3 best book of 2020 overall, a New York Times notable book of the year, a New York Times book review editor's choice, a Goodreads Choice Award semifinalist, and seriously, many other accolades, including a tweet that I read from Stephen King, and that's when you know things have gone to a whole other level. He's also the author of the upcoming Razorblade Tears, which we'll talk about later. His short fiction has appeared in numerous anthologies and magazines. His style and tone are influenced by his varied life experiences, which include, but are not limited to, being a bouncer, a construction worker, a retail manager, and for 6 long hours, a mascot for a major fast food chain in the world's hottest costume. And we're definitely going to talk about that at some point. Shawn, welcome. Thank you so much for being here. I'll just tee it up by saying I was delighted and genuinely honored when our mutual pal, Ed Amar, AKA the Platonic Ideal Literary Citizen, introduced us and made sure I included you in our Summer's Lit Fest, which I was thrilled to do. And the timing couldn't have been more fortuitous because your book had just dropped. It had a lot of accolades already, but it's just been my joy in the subsequent 6 months to see you blow up into the stratosphere. Your rep preceded you in July, but now I feel it's like I'm walking on sacred ground. So it's a real honor to have you here, and I appreciate you making the time.
Well, thank you. That's definitely not a lot to live up to.
Yeah, no pressure, right?
I would also like to thank. Yeah, I would also like to thank Ed. He's my benevolent arch nemesis. We have a running joke about that, but Ed's a great advocate for the crime writers in the D.C., Maryland, Virginia area, and he's a tireless supporter of the art and the craft itself. And so please don't tell him I told you that. But no, thank you for having me. I'm so glad to be here. I appreciate it so much.
Well, good. So let's start at the top. So, we're going to dive into the book. There's a ton to talk about, but what's changed for those people that have either read the book or about to read the book? You've been on a bit of a journey these last 6 months or longer, but talk a little bit about how your world has changed since last time we were on the same screen.
Well, when in the summer, the book had just dropped, and it was, it came out with a lot of accolade. Well, a lot of nice comments from writers that I grew up reading. Walter Mosley, Dennis Lehane. But I think we were all a bit cynical. I think, and when you see a book like that, I know some people automatically think, "Oh, that's really cool," and other people, "Oh, yeah, he must have slid a little paper or something to get those blurbs." And so, initially, I didn't know how things were going to go because you're releasing a book at the height of the pandemic, and it's just such an incredibly complex situation to release a book at that time, and it's not the normal crime novel. It doesn't take place in a city. It doesn't have a cis white male protagonist. It's not about enormous stakes. I think the copy sometimes compares to Ocean's 11, but it has more in common with like Hell or High Water or something like that. It's desperate people with stakes that are important to them, but maybe not necessarily world changing. So when the book came out, I didn't know what to expect. And I'm just so incredibly humbled of the way that people have responded to it and reacted to it and have connected with it. And the act of writing is like, sometimes it's like telling yourself a joke for 9 months to a year and then hoping that everybody else gets the punchline. And so you don't know until the book is out in the open how people are going to receive it. And I'm just very very, very humble that people have received it well. And, you know, if you had told me a year ago that the book would be like Amazon's #1 thriller and it would have, you know, have sold the movie rights and it would be, you know, notable in the New York Times and in the Guardian and magazines all around the world, I would never, I would call you a liar to your face. And so it's just an incredible confluence of events that I am incredibly blessed to be a part of.
Well, listen, I mean, you are very modest and humble, and I think it's safe to say, as part of the writing community, I think one of the reasons that writers really love to celebrate when a great writer gets that attention is because it really, there's not enough of it to go around, so it very, very seldom happens to unworthy writers. So you should take a lot of pride in the fact that that didn't happen by accident. But if I were to try to tee it up and not invoke Ocean's 11, where I would come from is the first thing that really struck me, Shawn, reading this was, you know, so many thrillers, good ones too. It seems that the characters are kind of a delivery device for the plot. You're trying to get to the blow up. You're trying to get to the big bang. And this novel is all about the characters, especially Bug, our main character. And I think if I were to say so, although there's a very healthy and wonderful demographic that absorbs crime and thrillers, I think one of the reasons this has resonated with just such a huge audience is because these are real people that the reader can understand, and that's to your credit for bringing those people to life.
Oh, well, thank you. Yeah, I think, like you said, I'm a huge reader. I'm a fan of thrillers and heist novels and horror novels, and a lot of times, a lot of times characters in good books. That's not to denigrate those books at all, but a lot of times characters in books are chess pieces. You're moving the pawns and the bishops and the knights to make the plot happen, and so sometimes it's it's the idea that they're cogs in the wheel. Whereas I wanted to approach it in my particular book, I wanted the plot to be the car, but I wanted the characters to be the engine. You know, I wanted the characters to drive the plot. And so Bug and Ronnie and Reggie and Lazy and Kia and Darren and Javon are all, making decisions. And each decision has it's a cause and effect, and so each decision that they make has, negative and positive repercussions. And so when you do it like that, you can build off of the interconnectedness, the tapestry that connects them together. And so you can have a plot, like I said, that's not earth-shattering consequences, but, it can have gravitas because you care so much about the characters. You don't have to have a James Bond end of the world scenario if you have characters that people really connect with. And so when they're in peril, the readers feels that, and they feel for those characters and they wish for them to succeed. And so, and also I think the book is a vehicle, no pun intended, it's a vehicle for me to talk about things that I think are important to me, like the history, like the horrible history of violence and toxic and tragic masculinity, and the desperation of poverty and class and race and how those things interconnect. And so I always approach writing it from a character-driven standpoint first, and then I build the plot around the characters. I have to like the characters, I have to care about them, and then I can make the story, or hopefully make the story work.
Yeah, and I think what this, among the many things that I would praise this book for doing is there's not an ounce of cynicism, right? There's not a sense of what you mentioned, the chess pieces, and knowing that a certain character is going to come or go. That shines through, and I think we really can look at the inverse of what you just said, which I certainly agree with. But I think in a weird way, a James Bond or Ocean's 11. Even there's an implicit understanding that it's fantasy. So in a way, even though you want the good guys to win, the stakes are, even though, theoretically the stakes are huge because the world's going to blow up, but it's fake. In a book like this, it's so real, it's so to the bone. And who doesn't either have experience or know someone that's had experience with not being able to pay a bill? or having a business that's about to go under. So to me,
Mm-hmm.
it actually, I made ironically in some regards, it elevated the stakes because they're so real and the microscope is so laser focused on this one individual. Let's talk a little bit about Beauregard. He's such a fully drawn man, and you had the guts and the talent to make him very complicated. He's not a superhero, and he's not a scumbag. In fact, he's much more good guy than bad, but he's a very complicated guy, very fully formed. Talk a little bit about the inspiration, or did he come to you fully formed, or was that a work in progress where you kind of grew into this guy?
Well, the first time I wrote about Bug was about 5 years ago. I wrote a short story for a magazine called Thug Lit, and I wrote a story called Slant Six, and it's basically the story of the Duster. It's Bug recounting for some folks why the Duster means so much to him and why it's so important. And in that story, he was not nearly fully as formed as he is in the book, but I was fascinated. I'm always fascinated by people I'm fascinated by what drives people to physical or emotional violence. What makes you cross that line? Like if you're in traffic and you see somebody cut you off, what makes you or the person next to you either just let it roll off their back or decide to run the car off the road and drag the person out and smack them. And we all have that moment, I think, where we feel that in times like that. And so I'm fascinated by what forces drive somebody to not just think about it, but to do it. And I fully believe that most violence is a confession of pain, that most violence comes from internal pain or external struggle. And so with Bug, I wanted to talk about what drives a person that is on surface very intelligent, very skilled, very capable. I got a 1-star review from someone who said, I like the book, but I just wish Bug had used his smarts for good instead of evil. And I'm like, that's the whole point of the book. It's a crime novel, and this is me exploring it because I think some people don't understand that if you exist at a certain level of poverty, if you exist in a certain a hierarchy of class, if you exist in a certain level, if you're a person of color in America, your options are limited. It's like you're in a maze and someone keeps shutting off the avenues. And so for a guy like Beauregard, I think it's almost harder to be intelligent and be in desperate straits. The term ignorance and bliss is so true. It's harder when you realize I am smarter. I could do better if things weren't out of my reach. And so for Bug, it drives a lot of his decisions, but not all his decisions are driven by rage. He's also a very damaged person, and he's aware of his damage, but not aware enough of it to actually really do the work to fix it. He feels abandoned by his father. He feels put upon. He has a very toxic and combative relationship with his mother. He wants to be a better man than his father was. So he has sons that he loves. He has a daughter from a previous relationship that he feels responsible for. And so these pressures allow him to justify a lot of his actions. A friend of mine told me that when you write, the best writing is when you put your character in a tree and you just throw rocks at him. And I throw a lot of rocks at Bug. And the way he responds is because of his pathology and his history and the things that he's encountered. It's the nurture versus nature, but it's also the things that are out of his hands. And so I'm very fascinated. I did not want him to be a one-note tough guy. I wanted him to be a fully formed person who can do horrible things, but also can go home and make love to his wife and play with his kids and joke with his friends. And I think that is much more fascinating than just the robotic automaton character that ain't got time to bleed, so to speak.
Right. Well, and I think that speaks to what we were talking about earlier in terms of certain writers are able to catch lightning in a bottle, and more power to them. But I don't think there's a ton of mystery here why this book and this character has resonated so deeply with so many people. It's because he is fully drawn. You do care about him, but also I think you very subtly and slyly at times are really making a lot of commentary, right, on culture, both past, present, and probably not for nothing, but in the summer that we had and some of the things that were going on, this was almost like a companion piece to the real time. And I hope for a lot of people around our country, really understanding there are two systems, at least, if not more, two systems of justice. There are two ways that people that are trying to make a way for themselves are treated. And what Bug is facing every day are those rocks you talk about, whether it's, class issues, race issues, money issues, which who can't relate to that? But yeah, he's got a lot coming at him. And we lived through that experience. And again, I think it's always grounded in enough reality that even if someone has nothing in common with any of these characters, I've got to think very few readers are not going to understand from seeing the news or having friends or being on Facebook that these are very real people and you're reflecting very real issues.
Well, even like the antagonists or even like the side characters. I mean, like Ronnie and Reggie are, white men living in Southern Virginia below the poverty line. And yes, I wanted to draw a really good distinction between it is different being poor and white than it is being poor and black. However, that being said, Ronnie and Reggie are damaged individuals. And I also, like you said, I wanted to talk about the sometimes difficulty that men have communicating. I have a friend named Kelly Garrett who's a writer, an incredible mystery writer in her own right. And she always jokes me that if Bug would just listen to his wife, the book would be over in 7 pages. Because if he would just sell the duster, that would accommodate a lot of their money problems. But he can't, and he can't really articulate to her why. Now, as we get to know Bug, we realize he can't part with his car. It belonged to his father. It's the only connection, and he feels his father. He calls it a rolling tombstone. And so that inability that some men have about how they are able to articulate their feelings and how they're able to deal with the tragic and toxic factors that come along with what's expected in a stereotypical male role. I think, for Bug, if he was able to really just open up more and be a more mature person and not look at the past through these rose-colored glasses of nostalgia, like I said, a lot of things that happen in the book won't happen. But because he's not able to do that, he has to go through the fire, so to speak. I hope by the end of the book that people will realize that he's gone through a transformative experience. Hopefully, we don't know. I mean, it kind of ends ambiguously, and I think that's the best ending because that's more true to life. I think the ambiguity is more realistic, and so I wanted people to see that change, but also see how difficult it is. There's a phrase people will tell you to pull yourself up by your own bootstraps, but if you're somebody like Bug, you don't even have boots, and so that's also a part of it. But then also, there's car chases, there's fight scenes, there's shootouts. I wanted, I think it's Mary Poppins that said a little bit of honey makes the medicine go down. So, you want to write an interesting story, you want to pique people's interest, and then you can talk about things that are a little more, have a little more nuance.
No, that's right. And just for people watching that haven't read the book yet, I hope it goes without saying the highest recommendation, but don't take my word for it. Go to Amazon and check that out. But what I want to make clear, my commentary is that you masterfully weave in social commentary. This is an action-packed book, the chase scenes, the violence. So this is not a screed about politics. Not that there's anything wrong with that. But this is very much This scratches all the itches of someone that wants to get in that car and put the pedal to the metal. And you mentioned the side characters. From coming from me, the best compliment I can give you is in a very non-superficial way. There were times when it really evoked Elmore Leonard to me. Just these buffoons that you want to laugh at or you're afraid of, but you just can't help loving at the same time. Indelible sidekicks and some of the shenanigans, and you knocked it out of the park. You got the nuances of and how to make the action flow, right? Because it can't all be goons and successful violence. There's got to be humor and guys that can't shoot straight, etc.
I think so. I think any book, whether it's a crime novel, a horror novel, a so-called straight literary novel, you have to have the highs and lows because, again, a book doesn't have to replicate real life. It has to evoke real life. And I think that is the truth, that you have the highs and lows, the funny parts, the sad parts, the intense parts. Of course, in your particular genre, it's like music. If you're playing a symphony, you're playing at a certain pitch and a certain tone and using certain keys. If you're playing rock or you're playing country, you're using different keys.
Hey, everybody.
All right.
Thanks for checking in. This is the first time, and there's a first time for everything. We had a force majeure, as the legal documents say. Weather derailed what was an amazing conversation, but selfishly, this just means I get 2 doses of Sean Cosby. So this is part 2 of a discussion in progress. When we're done tonight, we're going to splice them together, and we'll have an hour plus of content. So let me just jump right in. Thank you for being here. It's part of the 1455 author series in conjunction with our friends at the awesome Potter's House in DC. For those of you that are not aware, we are here to talk about this book by this man, Shawn S.A. Cosby. And I'm going to do a brief bio, and we're just going to jump right back to where we were. For those of you that don't know, and you should know by now because he's blowing up, Shawn is an Anthony Award winning writer from Southeastern Virginia, the best-selling author of Blacktop Wasteland, which won too many awards. I'm going to put this in the write-up. Just suffice it to say, it won so many awards we could spend the next half hour talking about those. But rapturously received commercially and critically. His short fiction has appeared in numerous anthologies and magazines. His style and tone are influenced by his varied life experiences, which include but are not limited to being a bouncer, construction worker, retail manager, and we are definitely going to talk about this tonight, for 6 hours, mascot for a major fast food chain in the world's hottest costume. Shawn, thank you for being here before. Thank you for coming back. It's wonderful to dialogue with you again, and it's great to see you.
Thank you for having me. It's great seeing you too. I'm glad we could fight the forces of fate and try to do this again. So I definitely appreciate it.
I said I got the quote wrong. I was like, we're going to be like old school post officers, the postmen. No rain, sleet, or snow. So our
dark of night, yeah.
So let me set the tone for both those of you that are thank you for checking back, and for those of you that are checking in. Again, we're talking about Blacktop Wasteland. By the time you're seeing this, you'll already have seen the first half hour. But what we were really getting into before weather struck was we were taking a deeper dive into Bug, the main character. And I think we adequately, for the purposes of this talk, discussed why he resonates, because he's a complicated guy. It really subverts the cliched thriller hero. And I think in addition to that, aside from the obvious literary merits of this work, what we didn't really dive into was this dropped summer of 2020, where there was so much civil unrest, including very necessary focus on the at least 2 systems of justice in our country, and the fact that for anyone facing poverty, but especially if your skin isn't white, your deck is stacked against you. So I loved what you said last week, Shawn, when you said, I put my character in a tree and throw rocks at him. I think you were quoting another writer, but you certainly do that with
Yeah.
Bug. And I just want to read, the epigraph is so on point, and then maybe you can riff a little bit on how you saw this in relation to how you wrote the book. But you wrote about, you quoted Frank A. Clark saying, "A father is a man who expects his son to be as good a man as he was meant to be." There's so much going on in that sentence, but it's just perfect for this book. But, Bug as a son and a father, maybe talk a little bit about, how this all came together and where your head was at.
For me personally, it was somewhat cathartic. I've talked about this in other interviews, but my mom and dad separated when I was very young, and for a long time, me and my father did not have a really great relationship, and that's not either his fault or my mom's fault. I think everyone realizes after a while, most relationships are shades of gray. There's no black and white. There's no one right viewpoint. But for me personally, it was hard reconciling the idea of wanting to be, or what a good man was, without the main male figure in my life that I needed. I had other male figures. I had, my mom had brothers, and my uncles were great. They show up as characters in my work all the time. They were great. I like to call them backyard raconteurs. They were barbecue orators, and so I grew up around men and women who were funny, who were humorous, who could tell a good story, but also were determined to make me as good a person as I could be. So any good qualities that I grew up with come from my mom and my uncles and some of my dad, But for me, when I sat down to write Blacktop Wasteland, my initial desire, motivation was to write a story about poverty and how poverty influences individuals and how that, it can create situations where people feel desperate and they feel like maybe crime is their only way out. I'm not justifying that, or I'm not trying to laud that, but it is a point of view, and it's one that I wanted to examine. But at the same time, what ended up happening was, again, like I said earlier, it just became very cathartic for me. I think there is a complexity and nuance and hidden language to the way men communicate with their sons, and the way sons communicate with fathers, and the way fathers communicate with mothers. And a lot of times, call it tragic masculinity, or just call it the millstone of Western society. Men are hard pressed to open up and verbalize how they feel. They're hard pressed sometimes, not all men. They're hard pressed to talk about their feelings and how they are experiencing the world. And so a lot of times that puts them in an awkward position. And I really found myself really delving into that, not only from my own point of view and the relationship as it evolved with my own father, but my friends and people that I grew up with, and watching the way they interact with their children. I'm at an age now where, I don't have any children of my own, but a lot of my buddies have kids. They have sons and daughters, and how they communicate with those children and with the mothers of their children. Sometimes they're wives, sometimes they're in multi-dwelling families. But it's fascinating to me. It's fascinating the way society presses upon men in a way, and you're supposed to be tough and strong and never cry, never show emotion, never show weakness. And for me, that's not realistic. And so while initially Bug seems that way, we first meet Bug, he's beating the hell out of somebody that's cheating him out of his winnings in a car race.
Yeah.
What I wanted to do was also show the other side of him, and in doing so, maybe show the other side of a lot of people, a lot of men, a side that they could relate with. There's that Bug or Beauregard, but then there's also him sitting in the car that belonged to his father. He owns this old Duster that was his dad's, and how he sits in there for hours at a time sometimes, reliving the past. He calls it a rolling tombstone because his father disappeared when he was young. And so those things were, I could be fancy and say that I planned to talk about those things when I started writing the book, but they were happy accidents that allowed me a little existential relief, so to speak.
Well, so in addition, I think you just perfectly encapsulated that there's the brutality, but there's also a lot of tenderness and tender moments in this book, which again illustrates the complexity that most men deal with. But my next question, you teed it up beautifully, was like, all right, enough of the literary mumble. Let's get to the car stuff. And what I would say is, of course, in full props as a symbol, and the relationship with his father, and the fact that his father's not around but is still there all the time, is so perfectly symbolized by this car. But I would take it a step further and say, we may have touched on this. I don't think we did last time. The notion that, in your typical thriller, of course, the car is literally and figuratively the getaway, and where the guy gets to be macho, but it's almost a fake delivery device. In this book, this is clear to me. This is not the result of some research where the author hung out with some people that were in the car culture. This is written by a guy that knows and loves cars. And that, as a decided non-car guy, I got a lot of joy out of seeing the different ways you deal with that car. The literal, he fixes it. He obsesses about it. But there's the tenderness that he can't even show his wife that he has toward that car. And that's filled with memories. That's filled with meaning. But talk a bit about, I mean, I'm assuming you're a car guy.
Yeah. Yeah. For me, it's funny, the unique position that cars hold in American society, and specifically the position they hold in rural America. You know, if you grew up in New York or Chicago or Philadelphia, you might have a car, you might not. I know people. I've become friends with people who grew up in a more metropolitan area who've never gotten a driver's license. When you grow up where I live, and I'm out in the rural, I'm in the Tidewater area. I'm about 2 hours away from DC, but I'm in the middle of a very rural area, and I love it. I grew up here. I'm only one town away from where I was born. But a car is a necessity. But from that necessity grows an aesthetic that you embrace. You know, I grew up around cars. I had one of my first times getting in actual trouble with my mom was I snuck out at 12 years old. My cousin, who's no longer with us, my cousin had a 73 Maverick, and he was going to go drag race some guys on the other side of town. And so I snuck out of our trailer. I remember I didn't go out through the door. I got out through my window, and I climbed down out the window and walked out to the head of the road and jumped in the car with him. And, you know, I'm 12 or 13. I have no business at all being there. And yeah, there was the visceral thrill of being around cars, being with my cousin, being one of the guys. But what I observed, and something that laid in my subconscious, was being around these men, these African-American, for the most part, African-American men, and seeing the pride that they took in the cars. And it was almost akin to the environment in a barbershop that people talk about, where for one moment, you're not a oppressed part of society. You're a man. You're a man, and this car is a symbol, not just of your masculinity, but of your humanness, that you're an actual human being, and that it represents a multitude of things. You know, I said this in another interview, but it's true. For a lot of people, a car represents freedom. It's, freedom is just, a full gas tank and slipping behind the wheel, and you can go anywhere you want. And that's the beauty, of car culture in America. And I think that's why it's such an Americanized symbol, of freedom, not just of masculinity, because there's plenty of women that are into cars. I grew up around them. Yeah. But this idea that for someone who is, a part of society that is oppressed, we all have heard the phrase "driving while black," and a lot of unfortunate and tragic scenarios where police start behind the wheel of a car. And that's true. But on the other side of that, there's something about being behind the wheel of a pulsating, beating, bestial piece of American muscle, when you can go 0 to 60 and you can feel those G-forces press you back in the seat. And you, for a moment, you let all of those other things go. And for me, it was just an incredible part of my life as a young man. I still am a huge car fan. I unfortunately do not have a badass car like Buck. I used to have a 76 Oldsmobile Cutlass with a 405 Mopar engine, and I had aluminum U-joints, and the car, we used to call it the Green Pepper. That was the nickname of the car. And I had that car from my 10th grade year in high school till I graduated, and my mom made me sell it because I got 3 speeding tickets the same day. So my mom's like, we got to pay these tickets. You got to sell this car. And so I had to sell the car. One thing about growing up in a small town is funny. The first 2 times I got a speeding ticket at like noon on that Saturday. I was trying to impress this girl that I like. We were doing like about 70 and a 45. So a guy pulls me over, the cop pulls me over, doesn't give me a reckless driver, just give me a speeding ticket. Got a second speeding ticket late on the afternoon on my way to a bonfire party. The third ticket, he didn't impale my car. He just made me leave it on the side of the road. And because he knew my mom, he took me home. So, my misspent youth, I can talk about it now because statute of limitations run out. But yeah, cars were always a huge part of my childhood, my young adulthood. And also, on a more serious note, I grew up, my family was very poor. My mom was disabled. She worked part-time as a teacher's aide. My dad actually left town for a while, and it was hard for him to send us money. So we grew up, moved in with my grandparents, and we didn't have indoor plumbing until I was 16. And I learned to become a shade tree mechanic because we couldn't afford to take the car to a real mechanic. You know, it's funny. I have this theory. I'm just going to expound on it really quick.
Sure.
How American car manufacturers, killed the shade tree mechanic. There was a time where you could just, if you knew enough, you could go to the library and get a Chilton manual, which are these huge, they look like Tolkien tomes, but these huge manuals that will tell you everything you need to know about any car from like 1950 to 1991. And around 91, 92, American car manufacturers really shifted the way cars were built. Everything became computerized to the point you couldn't work on a car if you didn't have a diagnostic computer. And I think that's a shame. I really do, because, and I think that's why classic cars, American muscle cars, drag racing is still such a vibrant part of American culture, and especially in the South. It is huge in the South. North Carolina, South Carolina, Virginia, Georgia. And it's funny, as it changes as you go from state to state and region to region. In Virginia, North Carolina, it's all about the engine. It's all about who can get up, who can get to that line, 0 to 60, that quarter mile, as they call it. You go further to the South, it becomes more about aesthetics. It becomes more about the candy coat, the candy colored coat, and the rims, and it's fine. But it still comes back to the freedom and the flexibility and the raison de rigueur that exists in American car culture. And like you said, for me, I love it. I'm the guy that has to stop, and if I see a 57 Chevy or a 63 Barracuda, I got to stop and take a picture of it. I've learned that I shouldn't have one because I have a heavy foot, but I'm still a fan.
Well, I mean, it's certain the love and knowledge obviously convey. And just while you were talking, I was thinking, Bruce Springsteen, at least in the 70s, made a career out of the car as metaphor for freedom. But then we think about like the typical, ace behind the wheel, Steve McQueen, and it's invariably, and this might betray my own, a shallow depth of reading, but it's associated with white men. And I love that this book, not even reclaimed, but positions a likable and complicated African American that not only can drive a car fast, but can take it apart, which is something that all these other white guys that I just mentioned, even when you're the suspension of disbelief, you don't see Steve McQueen pulling the engine apart and putting it together. So, the bug resonates and connects on so many different levels. But I also think, to your point, people maybe north of the Mason-Dixon line that don't know car culture, it's a worthy adventure, because they're going to understand this part of the world that they really are not in touch with at all, but they should be.
There are scenes in there are scenes in Blacktop Wasteland that are directly lifted from my own life. Not the hype scenes, but the scenes where Bug is just driving around in the car, and you just the moon is in the sky, in the night sky, and it's just a big fat onion behind you, and the trees are just flying by you, at dizzying heights, and they look elongated because you're going so fast. I've done that. I know a lot of people have done that. I've gone, like I said, I've gone to a drag race, an illegal and legal drag race. Let me say unsanctioned and sanctioned drag race. But to your point, I was inspired by all of those great wheelmen and drivers. There was a book called The Driver by Dwayne Cerzinski, a great writer out of Philadelphia. That was a huge influence on me. I've talked about Hell or High Water, which isn't really a car culture movie, but there are car chases and car scenes, and those two characters in that are central to that movie inspire me. John Salas's Drive, which was also made into a great movie with Ryan Gosling. Those movies inspired me. The thing I wanted, and I hope I don't come off sounding arrogant at all, but the thing I wanted to do different was I really wanted to go into the interior life of the wheel man. What is it? I went to a lecture one time. Walter Mosley gave a lecture about writing mystery fiction, but it works for crime fiction. He says, you got to give your main character multiplicity. They have to be doing other things, because when they're not, to paraphrase him, but what he said was, when your main character is not solving the mystery, and for my purposes, when my main character is not in the crime, I need to give him other things. He needs to have more things to do, because if you don't, he can become very boring very quick. And so, he loves his wife. He loves his kids, including his daughter from a previous relationship. He has a very complicated but ultimately loving relationship with his mother. His godfather, Booney, is a huge influence on his life and a really strong role model. The memory of his father, while sometimes emotionally taxing, is also comforting. So he has a lot going on outside the moments when he's in the car. There's only really 3 big car chase scenes in the book. There's the jewelry heist, there's the secondary heist that they're forced to do. I'm not trying to give any spoilers. And then there's the final car chase. And so I was influenced by all of that. I'm a child of the 80s. And so I grew up watching what some people call redneck noir, with like movies like Gator and White Lightning with Burt Reynolds, or a movie like Crazy Larry, Dirty Mary with Peter Fonda, a movie like Badlands with Martin Sheen and Sissy Spacek. I grew up watching those on a Saturday night because we didn't have cable. You only had 3 channels. And so, when I wasn't playing the antenna, I was able to sit there and watch those movies. And so there's I wrote about this in an essay for an online website called Hard Boiled Wonderland. There is a camaraderie in poverty. It is very different being poor in America and being black, and being poor in America being white. And I'm fully aware that I've lived that. But there is also certain things that are universal when you live below the poverty line, regardless of your color. And I was really somebody that focused on those things as a kid growing up. And in my writing, I tend to draw the dichotomy in those things and the unifying theory in those things as well. I want to show where, there are certain things that if you live in a rural town, it's hard to get indoor plumbing. It's embarrassing to have to use food stamps. But at the same time, if you live in a small town and maybe you're a person of European descent, and your uncle runs the grocery store, you might get an extra bag of groceries in your basket that you didn't pay for. That's not stealing. That's somebody, because you're white, they're white, they're your uncle or your cousin. They may look out for you, and that doesn't happen with people of color. If you're poor in a small rural town and you go to the bank and you're white, and your dad's best friend from high school is the bank loan officer, you might get a loan even though you don't have the best credit. We don't get extended that benefit of the doubt a lot. So where there are similarities, I also try to enumerate the differences. And with Blacktop Wasteland, I don't do it as heavily as I've done it in previous works or my subsequent work, but it's there. It's very much a part of the fabric of the story.
No, it is indeed. It's very important. Like I said, I think, again, this book would be highly recommended for any number of literary reasons. But I think the fact that it came out this past year, when some of these conversations, which are certainly belated, were more to the forefront, just gives it an extra layer of relatability and urgency. So without further ado, I would love if you'd be willing to read a brief section. There's nothing like hearing the author's words and the author's voice.
All right, I'm going to read a part of the first chapter.
Okay.
I guess content warning. There's some very profane language, salty language, so to speak. So I may try to edit that a little bit myself, but I just want to give people a heads up. I don't want anybody to, if there's any kids watching. So, but I'll start with a little bit of the first chapter.
Okay.
Chapter 1. Shepherd's Corner, Virginia, 2012. Beauregard thought the night sky looked like a painting. Laughter filled the air, only to be drowned out by a cacophony of revving engines as the moon slid from behind the clouds. The bass from the sound system in a nearby Chevelle was hitting him so hard in the chest, it felt like somebody was performing CPR on him. There were about a dozen other late model cars parked haphazardly in front of the old convenience store. In addition to the Chevelle, there was a Maverick, 2 Impalas, a few Camaros, and 5 or 6 more examples of the heyday of American muscle. The air was cool and filled with the scent of gas and oil, the rich, acrid smell of exhaust fumes and burnt rubber. A choir of crickets and whippoorwills tried in vain to be heard. Beauregard closed his eyes and strained his ears. He could hear them, but just barely. They were screaming for love. He thought a lot of people spend a large part of their life doing the same thing. The wind caught the sign hanging above his head from the arm of a pole that extended 20 feet into the air. It creaked as the breeze moved back and forth. Carter's Speedy Mark, the sign proclaimed in big black letters set against a white background. The sign was beginning to yellow with age, the letters worn and chipped, the cheap paint flaking away like dried skin. The second E had disappeared from the word speedy. Beauregard wondered what had happened to Carter. He wondered if he had disappeared too. Ain't none of y'all motherfuckers ready for the legendary O's. Y'all might as well go home back to your ugly wives. For real though, y'all ain't got nothing for the legendary O's. She does 60 in second. $500 line to line. Huh? Y'all mighty quiet. Come on now, the O's done sent me that boy home with his pockets lighter. I done outrun more cops than the Duke boys and the O's. You ain't just beating me with the O's, homeboy. A guy named Warren Crocker crowed. He was strutting around his 76 Oldsmobile Cutlass. Beauregard had to admit it was a beautiful car. Dark green body with chrome mag rims and chrome trim that ran across its surface like liquid lightning. Smoked out glass and LED lights emitted an ethereal bluish glow like some bioluminescent sea creature. Beauregard leaned against his duster as Warren pontificated about the invincibility of the Oldsmobile. Beauregard let him talk. Talk didn't mean anything. Talk didn't drive the car. Talk was just noise. He had $1,000 in his pocket. It was all the profits from the last 2 weeks at the garage after most of the bills had been paid. He was still $800 short on the rent for the building that housed his business. It had come down to a choice between the rent or glasses for his youngest, which wasn't really a choice at all. So he had reached out to his cousin Kelvin and asked him to find out where the nearest street races were being held. And Kelvin, he still knew some guys who knew some guys who knew some other guys who knew where the money races were being held. And that was how they found themselves just outside of Dinwiddie County, 10 miles from the fairgrounds where legally sanctioned drag races were held. Beauregard closed his eyes again. He listened to Warren's car idle. Under the sound of the boasting and the dick swinging, Beauregard heard an unmistakable ticking. Warren had a bad valve in his engine. Now that left two possibilities. He knew about it, but thought it was an acceptable defect that could be overcome by the sheer power of his motor. Maybe he had a nitrous boost on it and didn't care about one funky valve. Or he didn't know it was bad and was just talking a lot of shit. Beauregard nodded at Kelvin. His cousin had been milling through the crowd trying to drum up a big money race. There'd already been 4 contests, but no one was willing to put up more than $200. That wasn't going to cut it. Beauregard needed at least $1,000 bet. He needed someone who would take one look at his duster and see an easy payday. Look at its stripped down exterior and assume it was a pushover. In short, he needed an asshole like Warren Crocker. Crocker had already won one race, but that had taken place before Beauregard and Kelvin had arrived. Ideally, he would have liked to watch the man drive before he made the bet, see how he handled the wheel, how he navigated the cracked asphalt on this stretch of Route 83. But beggars can't be choosers. It had taken them an hour and a half to get out here, but they had come because Beauregard knew no one in Red Hill County would race him, not in the duster. Kelvin moved in front of Warren as he was preening around his car. My man over there, he got 10 friends, so he can be doing 70 in second while you still trying to drag your ass out of first, Kelvin said. He let his booming voice fill the night. All the chatter ceased. The crickets and the whippoorwills were working themselves into a frenzy. Or is all you do is talk? Beauregard asked. I think we'll stop there. That's the beginning of the drag race.
Thank you, sir. That literally sets the scene because that's how the book begins. I've got 3 promises. I know that I'm going to revisit this and enjoy it. Especially now that I've heard your voice. Those of you watching, if you haven't already been convinced, you're going to love it. But I also want to jump forward a little bit and brag on you. Nothing makes me happier than when great writers and great people have good tidings. So in addition to the well-warranted props this book continues to get, you dropped the news recently about some other exciting things coming down the pike. You want to share kind of what's going on in 2021 for SA?
Yeah, my next novel, titled Razorblade Tears, will be released in July of this year, and we just announced that they sold the movie rights to Paramount Players Studio, subsidiary of Paramount Films, and it's set to be produced by Jerry Bruckheimer's company, and that is just mind blowing. I was not anticipating that at all. The rights for Blacktop Wasteland sold last year, which was like beyond my wildest dreams. And the script for that is actually being written by a man named Virgil Williams. He's the Academy Award nominated co-writer of the screenplay for the movie Mudbound. And I got to speak with him, and that's just been an incredible experience. And then, I got to tell you, there were a few people interested in the movie rights, and my agent calls me and said, "Hey, Jerry Bruckheimer wants to talk to you." And I'm like, "You do what now?" And he was like, "Jerry Bruckheimer wants to talk to you." And so we set up a Zoom call. So it was Mr. Bruckheimer, his chief of production, and then a representative from Paramount. And the one thing I've learned is people who are very successful, they don't talk a lot. He didn't talk a lot during the meeting, but the things he said two main things to me. He said, "I make movies that make money, and I want to be in business with you, not just to make you money." He said, "but I think this is a special property." And he only said that like toward the end of the meeting. He didn't, but he said it with such conviction and such confidence. It was like, well, yeah, let's do this. What the hell? But I'm very honored. I'm very humble that they've chosen to take on this project. And man, I tell you, and just to give you an elevator pitch about Razorblade Tears. Razorblade Tears is another rural noir. It's a standalone, so it's not a sequel to Blacktop Wasteland. And it tells the story of two men, one black, one white, both ex-convicts, whose sons were gay and were married. And about a week after they get married, they're murdered. And so these two men who did not have really good, healthy relationships with their sons because of their sexuality decide to embrace their former violent lives and seek revenge and find out who killed their sons, and at the same time trying to find a little bit of redemption for the way they treated them. And so that book, I was working on that while Blacktop Wasteland was in the pre-production phase, I guess. And, it's funny, I have a friend named Jordan Harper. He's a really great writer, and he's a novelist and a screenwriter. He's worked on The Mentalist and Gotham, and just really great guy. He's worked in Hollywood for a long time. And when my agent started shopping Razorblade Tears around, he said, "Hey man, I just want to tell you, I had some meeting with some execs at a network, and your name came up." He said, "So you're probably gonna sell the movie rights to this soon." And I'm like, and I was just like, "Yeah, whatever." I mean, and it ended up being happening. I think the one thing I like to say when I talk about all the stuff that's going on in my writing is that people will look at you and say, "Oh, well, that's an overnight success," or "Man, you just jumped on the scene." I've been seriously writing, when I say seriously, actually sending out stories since I was 17 years old. I went to college. I was pursuing an English degree. I had to drop out because of my mom's some health issues with my mother. But I've always just continued writing, and I took writing courses, and I took creative writing courses at community colleges. I read a lot of books about writing. One of my teachers in high school gave me Strunk & White's Elements and Style. I still have a copy at my house. I think the thing I like to tell people is that being published and being a published author, it's 50% talent, but it's 50% stubbornness. It's 50% keep knocking your head against the wall, keep knocking your head against the door. It's taking a lot of punches. It's growing a thick skin. My first book, My Darkest Prayer, was published by an independent press out of Maryland called Intrigue Publication, the great Austin and Denise Camacho, who took a chance on that. And that book got rejected 63 times. Wow. I can't tell you how many times my short stories have been rejected. I can't tell you how many times I've gotten rejection letters that basically insinuated there was no market for what I wanted to write about. Even with Blacktop Wasteland, I had people that expressed a lot of interest, and then somebody higher up decided, no, that's not the kind of book that we think we can sell. And, you think you got a deal, and like a day before you're ready to sign a paper, it drops away. And I think I just try to tell anybody, that wants to be a writer, you just got to keep at it, man. It's like chopping down a mountain with an ice pick. You can do it. It's just going to take you a while.
That's right.
But if you stop, it'll never get done. So.
Well, I really appreciate you adding that context, Shawn, because, I think, for writers and astute readers, nobody reads a book like this and thinks, oh, he must have just sat down one day and knocked this out. It's so obvious, your love of culture, your deep study of craft, your ability to advance the plot, your enviable ability to write multiple characters, multiple perspectives. All of that is brought to bear here. But I really appreciate you emphasizing what so many writers I talk to, and in my own experience, talk about, which is, yes, you've got to have talent, you've got to nurture the talent, you've got to work hard, but rejection is the norm, and persistence is everything. What I really love, though, Shawn, is, of course, as writers, we want to see good writers be rewarded, but I especially love, across all art forms, when a writer is told, maybe for the best intended reasons, although they're usually myopic, that a particular book just won't sell. And it turns out that that's not the case. I mean, Harry Potter comes to mind, like all these books that ended up doing well. But, you're another mold breaker in that regard. And you're a hero of sorts for all of us, to show that you've got to write what you believe in. And, that's more important than what happens. But if you write well, success is more likely to follow than if you don't write well.
I will begrudgingly say thank you. I don't think of myself as a hero, but I do think it's important that, there's not a lot of rural African-American fiction. You think of Alice Walker with The Color Purple, and maybe Temple. Am I familiar? Ernest J. Gaines, recently, he just passed away a few years ago, was probably one of the people that was one of the only people growing up that I saw that wrote about people that I knew, people I grew up with. I like to tell people the movie Sounder was not a movie for me. It was a documentary, because that was my life. That was what I was growing up in. We were really poor, and there's a wealth of stories that exist in the rural African-American dysphoria. You know what I'm saying? And I think there's other writers out there now that are doing stuff that are way better than me, who are going to come up and tell those stories. And I think for too long, I grew up on Southern Gothic fiction. I grew up reading, Faulkner and Eudora Welty and Flannery O'Connor and, Harry Crews and Charles Willeford. And later on, maybe rural Appalachian fiction from Daniel Woodrell and David Joy and folks like that. And it always bothered me, not that those folks are wrong, but it always bothered me that there wasn't ever a voice that centralized the African-American rural experience that wasn't also just pain porn, if that makes sense. That it wasn't just, the long suffering story, that there are, African-American folks that are living in the South that are middle class, upper middle class, lower middle class, and poor. And there's a wide range of stories that exist within those communities. And I just, if it is nothing else, I hope Blacktop Wasteland helps open the way for people that want to tell those stories. The next writer from the South, maybe it's an African-American woman, maybe it's a LGBTQ man who wants to tell that story. I'm not the first person to do it at all. Like I said, I spoke about Mr. Gaines and Alice Walker and folks like that, Zora Neale Hurston, people like that. But I think I hope we're at a paradigm shift moment in fiction where that story isn't, or that type of story isn't just a niche or a subgenre, but it can be something that people can get behind, and it can find success. There's a great book by James Smiley called 1,000 Acres, one of my favorite books. And there's someone right now, somewhere in America, that's writing that story from the perspective of a person of color, an LGBTQ person, a non-binary person, a person of Latinx descent, all of those stories. And it doesn't have to be just one. It could be a multitude of those stories at the same time. Trust me when I tell you this, there's enough money in publishing. There's enough money out there. I'm not saying I got it, but I know people that I have become friends with. There's enough money out there. And that's, I think, the truth of the matter that we have to get to, that certain publishing entities can get behind a book if they want to. I firmly believe that. And I was very blessed to be with a company that believed in me in Flatiron. It's not always the case for writers of color. And one more thing I'll say, a lot of times writers of color, we don't get a chance to strike out. A lot of people get 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 12 strikes. A lot of times when you're a writer of color, any marginalized writer, you get one bite of that apple, and it's terrifying. And so I hope that we're at a paradigm shift where other writers of color are not just a trend, it's just a norm. I hope.
Well, listen, I amen. I couldn't agree more. I do think the data is starting to be undeniable that as America, becomes more multifaceted, in terms of, it's always been that way. America contains multitudes, but I think collectively there's an appetite for hearing these different perspectives that are contributing to a real good dialogue. But I will not resist the opportunity to praise you again and say, I appreciate and understand your modesty, but I think the reality is, for certain paradigms to shift, there have to be works that are just undeniable and unignorable. And I think some of the people you mentioned are of that ilk, but you certainly are of that ilk too, and you kind of help drag consciousness forward. So you may not want to call yourself a hero, but I will call you a hero, certainly to me as a writer, and someone that wants to celebrate and wants to see, the America that I know reflected in the books that are being read. Certainly for 1455, we want to have programming that represents this diversity of voices, because of course, as you pointed out with 1,000 Acres, right? There's only a handful of stories. They're just told different ways and different perspectives, and there's such a richness.
Exactly.
There's a richness.
Exactly.
Well, listen, my friend, absolutely a joy to talk to you. I'm happy for you. I'm proud of you. I'm delighted to advocate for this book. It doesn't need my help, but I will give my gentle nudge to entice more people to buy it and be on the lookout for you. We're obviously going to hear a lot more from you. And I certainly will follow up with you, because we would love to hear you preview the new book at Lit Fest this summer, which is a scant 6 months away. But we'll deal with that later. For today, it's all about Blacktop Wasteland. Shawn Cosby, one of the breakout authors, very much a work in progress. A real pleasure to talk to you, and we'll look forward to talking to you again more soon.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you to 1455 for having me. I really appreciate this opportunity, and I'm so glad that we're able to finish our conversation. And I hope, maybe not in the not too distant future, we actually are face to face, and maybe over an alcoholic libation, perhaps. So
first several rounds are on me. And listen, we Virginia guys have to stick together, right? I mean, we don't live in the same neighborhood, but we do have to do a pour out for the Old Dominion.
Oh yeah, 2 up, 2 down, VA.
All right, well, listen, stay safe, be well, and all the continued success. You've earned it, you deserve it, and it's a real joy to include you in the programming. You make us look better, so thank you, sir.
Thank you so much. Y'all have a great evening. Thanks again.
All right, Shawn. Talk soon.
All right, man. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much for joining us. Make sure you follow us on our social media channels to stay up to date with what's new for 1455. And also, we would like to ask for your support. We depend on champions like you to keep us going. Visit 1455litarts.org and click support to make a contribution in any amount. We'll see you soon.